a lifetime of being haunted. Since I was little, I've had so many strange things happen to me. Some, not just to me. There's several examples, and I'll try to be thorough enough, but concise. The first one I have is my first memory. The first thing I can consciously recall was my grandfather bringing me in a metallic blue van with a diamond-shaped back window. He got me out and carried me into my childhood home and to my room. In the room were several shadow people standing in a circle. I was confused by them because I couldn't touch them but did not feel fear. When I described the memory to my mother later, she said that I perfectly described the van my grandfather had when I was born up until I was a year old. She's a skeptic on the paranormal. I regularly had night terrors in the Corvette car bed my parents had gotten me around 3 years old. I would wake up screaming and swear I saw a man in my room. This point was when a regular event began for me, no matter where I go to sleep. Chances are good if there's a closet in the room, it will be open in the morning if I went to bed with it closed. Doesn't matter if it's a regular hinged door or a sliding panel door. The same entity comes out to state at me in the night. I used to think it was something to do with the bed, because when my parents got rid of the bed, I stopped waking up to see it. Not sure if it's related to this part, but while in this house during this time, I would scare my mother out of her wits on a regular basis. I would wake up to her yelling my name, and I would be in my closet, under my bed, or even outside with no memory of how I got there. Though sometimes I would wake up very early, and something would tell me to go outside and play. My family still can't figure out how I could have unlatched all the locks on the back door to the house, since one slide lock was specifically put at the top of the door, and I was just 4 years old. It happened so much my mum would wake up and look out her window into the backyard for me first before going to my room. By the time I was 7, we moved into another home, the one my parents still live in to this day. The former owners had a daughter my age that died of pneumonia. She'd often be in my room floating in the corner by the ceiling looking at me. I was never bothered by her, but the closet entity moved with us, and it was worse than ever. My bed in the former house was on the other side, diagonally in the room from the closet door. In that new home, my bed was right by the closet. I would wake up with it right above me, peering down and smiling at me, in a horrifically menacing way. All I could do was stare at it. I couldn't scream, I was paralyzed with fear. I could move, so it wasn't sleep paralysis. If I closed my eyes and screamed at it in my mind to go away, and then sat up to get out of bed, it would be gone, and the hangers in my previously closed closet would be slightly swaying like the wind had been blowing. This went on for years, almost nightly. I got used to it. One afternoon, when I was 16, my parents left me home while they went on vacation with my sister. So I was home alone. I had a job and had to work, which is why I didn't go with them. My dad had a woodworking shop in the basement, and he had taught me how to use most of his tools. At the time, my favorite thing was a Cherry Jones soda. They had fortunes, jokes, and bits of wit written in the caps. So I went down to the wood shop to make a box to keep my caps in. I made a crate-style box with small spaces in the sides, not big enough a cap could slip out. This was done to reduce weight. The top was held on with pegs that slid in and out of the sides. Just as I finished my project, about an hour of work, the lights went out. In the basement, the power to everything, the lights, all the tools, and power outlets, went through one master switch at the top of the stairs leading into the family room. There was also a radio that had been on, usually tuned to my dad's favorite classic rock station. It didn't stop making noise, but it wasn't playing music anymore. It was like it was cross-jammed to a demonic talk radio station and a commercial for hell. I felt my way in the dark to the stairs and went to open the door. At this point I thought the power was out for some reason and wasn't panicking, just weirded out by the radio chatter. When I reached the door, it wouldn't budge, at all, and it wasn't exactly a sturdy door. Hollow, and normally the panels would give if you pushed on the door itself, instead of pulled it by the handle. But at that moment, it was rock solid, and wouldn't even shake in the lock. I began to panic. I felt for the light switch and could feel it was already up in the on position. I flipped it down, and nothing happened. Just then, as if on cue, the table saw loudly, whirred to life. I started beating on the door and rammed my shoulder into it. I could feel the air turn cold, and I started yelling. Seconds later, the door opened, and I spilled out into the family room. I could hear the saw spinning back down, and the radio was silent. I spent the rest of the night in my room, with the TV on, playing on my laptop, unable to sleep. My parents thought I was crazy when I told them my story, and my dad told me he didn't want me using his tools anymore without him around. In the next few days, I'd retrieved my finished box and put my collection of caps in it. I'd come home from work in the later afternoon one Sunday after doing an opening through church rush shift. I was greasy and gross and went to take a shower. I took off my clothes in my room, wrapped up in a towel, and took a pair of shorts with me to the bathroom across the hall. When I was done getting clean, I walked back into my room to find my box overturned in the floor. The caps were strewn across the whole room, like someone had tried to toss them out in a heave. The 4 pegs that held the top on, laying neatly together in the middle of where the box had been sitting on my desk. No one else was home, no one living anyway. A few years later, I had a girlfriend that came over to stay for the first time. I had gone to use the restroom, and when I came back into my room, she was sat all the way back against the wall on the bed, staring wide-eyed at the ceiling. I'd never spoke about my ghosts with her before, so I was a little caught off guard when she asked, "Who is she?" I said, "You can see her," and the look on her face answered for her. She looked like she was almost relieved, but still half scared, having confirmation that it's real. It was then that we discussed the paranormal for the first time. I began staying over at her place more often before finally moving in with her when my parents asked me to move out, since I was spending all my time with her anyway. It's hard to when you're glued to the hip. Almost immediately after I moved my stuff in, she and I both began to see shadow people frequently around the apartment. She'd be taking a shower and would see someone come into the bathroom and open the curtain to blow me a kiss, and would find I was still in the living room. Or I would be in bed waiting for her to come back from the bathroom and would see a shadow come into the room. Just things like that, all over the small living space. One winter night, we had just laid down to cuddle and warm up while we fell asleep. We were just about unconscious when we heard a sudden loud thud on the floor, followed by several smaller bumps and a bang in the adjacent kitchen. She was laying facing towards the door and the rest of the room, on the edge of the bed. She froze and wouldn't move and told me to go see what it was. With all my previous experiences, I wasn't afraid, and I joked, "You want me to go die while you stay comfy? Come with me." She got up and followed close behind me into the kitchen. I went over to the light switch on the opposite wall and flicked it on. It became apparent what we had heard. A small metal fan we used to circulate air in the summer that had been sitting on the bottom shelf of a baker's rack had somehow jumped off the shelf and bounced across the floor until it hit the kitchen cabinet doors on the other side of the room, hard enough to bump the door open. Never could come up with an explanation as to how that could happen. 2 years into our relationship, she got pregnant very unexpectedly and ended up having a miscarriage. An amniotic sac formed and a placenta, but they could never find a fetus on the ultrasound. My parents invited us to come stay at their house while she recovered from a dilation and curettage. We ended up staying about a month, with her being bedridden for the first 2 weeks. While we were there, the day after we left the hospital, the tree in the front yard of our apartment caught fire in the early morning and burned to the ground. The fire department had been called, and they could not put it out. It didn't damage anything else, and they couldn't determine any reason for why the fire wouldn't extinguish until the tree, a Bradford pear, had been totally consumed. My parents had one in the front yard of their house, and it got hit by lightning and burned slightly, but the rain put it out. So, I know those trees aren't some kind of source of Greek fire. She got pregnant again not long after, and we ended up having a baby boy. The paranormal activity seemed to stop around then. As in, we actively noticed we both weren't seeing shadow people, and nothing unexplained was happening. Stuff wasn't randomly disappearing, and everything seemed normal. Our relationship was deteriorating rapidly, which I won't get into, apart from saying she decided she was going to take the baby and move back to Ohio where she grew up, whether I was going to move with them or not. Never was interested in having children. But I couldn't give up my son, so I packed everything we had up, and we moved in December of 2008, 3 months after he was born. The day we arrived at the house she had found to rent, I found out 2 things. One, it was a garage that was still being converted into a house. And two, it was directly across the street from an actual house that her estranged mother was going to move into and begin renting at the same time we were moving. Not paranormal, but scary as hell, let me tell you. The landlord lived next door and wasn't expecting us that day. I was mostly out of the loop and said I had to get the truck unpacked. He said he'd try to open the old front door since the other part with the main door wasn't done yet. Between the two of us, an older man that had been a handyman and mechanic his whole life, and me, a 21-year-old former bodybuilder, pushing from one side and pulling from the other, could not get this door to budge. It was made of heavy, thick oak and was warped into the frame permanently. Trust me, this is important to the story. We had to unpack and work around the guy and his son working on finishing the kitchen. It was primarily just me and my ex's little brother getting everything moved in. As he and I walked off the truck carrying the couch, just as we were halfway into the house, we both felt something rush past us that didn't feel like wind. We could see a black shape fly through the house and into that old door. It hit it so hard the door opened. Once the house was done, the front door shut again. It seemed that our shadow people had come back. Just as before, they'd come bother one of us while the other was doing something else in another room. Her siblings saw them too. That winter was the most bitter cold I've ever lived through and still is the most snow I've ever seen in a season. By the start of spring, she asked me to move out. She cited the ghost spirits as one reason she didn't want to stay with me anymore. I guess already having another boyfriend was also at least a minor inconvenience for her. I found a place right away and had a steady job, and I was living on my own alone for the first time in my life. For the first year, nothing really seemed out of the ordinary. Random, occasional shadows, but only when I was alone. If my son was with me, they would leave us in peace. This apartment bedroom did not have a closet. I moved into another apartment a year later, and things got weirder. The frequency of the shadow people coming in and out of rooms went way up. My closet door began doing its change state routine again, and I'd hear cabinets shut in the kitchen or thumps across the floor, especially at night. And it didn't matter if my son was there or not. This was all the time. But the two standout things that happened in this space were close together in time, and seemed to be related but more alien than ghost. I got a shower when I came home from work one night, and as I emerged from the bathroom, naked, I was startled to see my vertical blinds swaying in my living room. As they parted, I could see someone standing right up against the glass on the other side of the still-shut ground floor patio sliding door. I had a pair of athletic shorts on the floor, so I threw those in and grabbed a knife out of my desk drawer. I sprinted to the door and slid the blinds out of the way. The door was locked, so I opened it and quickly ran out and spun around. I couldn't see anyone anywhere, and I had a clear, well-lit view of the parking lot and the rest of the complex. I went back inside and locked the door. I ended up putting a spare shower curtain rod in the track of the sliding door. It was difficult trying to sleep that night. I couldn't figure out how the blinds were moving like they were, and how anyone could have made a totally clean getaway in the maybe 10 seconds it took me to get outside. Maybe 2 days later or so, I was woken up around 4 a.m. by the sound of knocking on my bedroom window. I went to the window and barely cracked the blinds just at the very edge of window and couldn't see anything or anyone out there. That window faced a courtyard with all the entrances to the other apartments. When I turned around, I could see a light under my bedroom door. I usually keep my lights off and knew I hadn't left anything turned on in my living room. My immediate thought was someone had broken in. I went to open the door, but it wouldn't open. The knob wouldn't even turn, and the light just gradually got brighter, to the point my door felt warm, and the light was leaking in from every edge of the door. My mind was racing, wondering if there was a fire or what the hell was happening. I took a picture of it with my phone at the time, and I'll try to find it if I still have the picture in my archives. I had my hand on the doorknob when suddenly it went dark, and the handle felt loose. I opened the door, and it was warm still. My carpet across the living room floor was warm. For reference, it was late fall, and I hadn't turned my heat on yet. All my doors and windows were shut and locked with nothing disturbed that I noticed, except the next night when I came in from work and went to feed the cheap fish I got for my son. He had 4 fish in a large tank with a few simple decorative items, 2 medium goldfish, a beta, and a small pleco that I respectively had named Alpha, Beta, gamma, and theta, with the first three related to the idea radioactive decay, only because I had a radiation fallout shelter sign on the wall near the tank. I opened the fish food container and went to open the lid to shake some in and couldn't see any fish. The beta was a bright red, and the orange of a goldfish is typically pretty apparent. I closed the lid and got down to look up close, and there wasn't a single fish in the tank. I took everything apart, emptied the gravel, disassembled the filter. No sign that there were ever fish in the tank to begin with. At the end of that year's lease, I moved to another apartment that I stayed in for 2 years. Things initially seemed way calmed down, but I quickly noticed that the door to my son's room would be open when I usually kept it closed when he wasn't with me. It was directly across the hallway from my bathroom, and I had to pass it to get to my room. During the week, I'd come home from work in the evening and eat dinner before playing games on my computer in the living room, and then settle down in bed and watch some television before falling asleep. A lot of things changed in my life. I was working day shift and making good money at a better paying job. I drank lightly but regularly, started smoking, and was just generally indulgent. I've been alone ever since my ex broke our engagement. So, no one has been around to tell me I can't do whatever I want. The shadow that seemed to hang around with me there gave me the distinct impression of being a child. It would go in my son's room, and I'd see it peeking out from the hall when I'd be cooking in my tiny kitchen or gaming in my adjacent living room. If I would be in the shower, this small shadow would stand outside the curtain like a kid would do. It didn't bother me much until it started moving things. I came home to find that there were Legos piled behind my front door. The door pushed them out of the way when I opened it, and there is no way they could have been there when I left. I have a large collection of Legos from my childhood and sets and pieces I've bought since all combined. I kept them in my son's room. They didn't come in the living room ever. I would find his room door open and his toys moved around from where they had been. I'd get out of bed and step on Legos. One night, I got angry due to all the stuff going on at the time and yelled at it, "Just leave me alone. I don't want you here. Go away." I heard the door in the hall shut and could hear crying through the shared wall behind my desk. After that, it all stopped, until an actual real boy from an abusive family in the building started coming and sitting by my door and crying at odd hours. But despite the timing, I don't think it was related. This brings me to where I live now, another apartment. I've been renting this place for 6, going on 7 years now. The only things that have happened here in the first 5 years was pictures randomly falling off the wall, and once I watched my bedroom door open right in front of me by itself. Though I chalk these up to non-paranormal events. I don't know if it's because I had an emotional outburst and asked for them to go away, or because they weren't ghosts but projections of other people, or what. But the things I've been used to all my life have pretty much stopped. With one exception that I can't explain, I have both my ears pierced with an industrial bar. A few months ago, I was getting ready for work and noticed the top ball had come undone and fallen off the bar. I didn't have the money to buy another piece of jewelry, so I left it like that for a couple days. In the meantime, I looked in my bed for the silver ball, the floor around the bed, and could not find it. I changed my bed sheets and pillowcase. The next night I came in from work, tossed my phone onto my bed from the doorway, and then walked into my bathroom to wash up. When I went to my bedroom and went to pick up my phone, it laid on its back, and sitting on the face, in the corner, resting on the case edge, is the ball to my bar.